Welcome in and welcome back. We are here for the fourth episode as we journey chapter by chapter or portion of chapter by portion of chapter through Leonardo da Vinci, the biography that has been gifted to all of mankind from Walter Isaacson. What we have in the latter part of this chapter is Leonardo as he is climbing from student to the position of master. Of course, biographies such as one of Leonardo really go to emphasize the fact that one does not stop being a student in order to become a master. One must constantly be a student. The difference seems to be when one is defined as a student, he or she is learning from a master, and when one is a master, he or she is learning from the subject itself. You go from learning from a person about the subject, from taking the subject into your person. And I think a really good place to start this conversation comes to us from page 52. It is about baptism of Christ. So I'm going to get this. This is the baptism of Christ painting. I feel like a kindergarten teacher, right? I did 4 weeks in the kindergarten classroom. Did 4 weeks. I make it sound like a prison sentence because it was. I started my education thinking I was going to be an English teacher. I am not. That is not the calling for me. Baptism of Christ. The culmination of Leonardo's collaboration with Verrocchio came in the mid-1470s with the completion of the baptism of Christ, which shows John the Baptist pouring water over Jesus while two angels kneeling beside the River Jordan watch. Leonardo painted the radiant turning angel on the far left of the scene, and Verrocchio was so awed when he beheld it that he, quote, resolved never again to touch a brush, end quote. Or at least, that's what Vasari tells us. Even allowing for Vasari's penchant to mythologize and trot out cliched themes, there was probably some truth to the tale. Afterward, Verrocchio never completed any new painting of his own. Any new painting on his own. More to the point, a comparison between the parts of the baptism of Christ that Leonardo painted with those done by Verrocchio shows us why the older artist would have been ready to defer. This does speak volumes. So a little bit was said in, I believe, the last episode about the fact that Verrocchio's studio was not to crank out geniuses, was not to manufacture the next great artist that would move civilization forward, but was instead to mass-produce paintings that were collected by people who could afford paintings. That was a dirty little secret of the age, right? It was a status symbol. It was not someone trying to become the first Leonardo, or the next Donatello, or anything like that. It was simply to adorn one's house with a status symbol. That is what Leonardo went to school to learn to do. He ended up being a bit better than that, and he ended up becoming something which transcended that for which he went to school. He was a genius, and what do geniuses do but innovate? Here we have a little bit of discussion on the Annunciation, which is that one right there, right? That's the painting. And on page 59, we have a little bit of discussion. The Annunciation shows Leonardo, still in his early 20s, experimenting with light, perspective, and narratives involving human reactions. In the process, he made some mistakes. But even the mistakes came from innovating and experimenting, heralded his genius. I defy you to name one genius from all of history that does not have accredited to his or her name innovation. In fact, it might be innovation that forces us to define someone as a genius. Not brilliant, but a genius. Brilliance could be said of someone who is playing within the lines of any given field. We might say that an athlete, for example, can be brilliant at his or her craft, at his or her sport. It would be difficult, people say it about Peyton Manning, that he was a genius. But brilliance is a term often accredited to an athlete. Brilliance within the craft. Someone who, like Barry Sanders, is able to cut across the field and understand the angles at play and know exactly when to cut back in order to not break one tackle but to avoid four more. That is brilliance. It's not genius. It's not genius. Genius comes from innovation. There's no real way to innovate as a player on a football field. When you talk about genius, oftentimes you're throwing around terms about a coach. Why? Because a coach draws up the plays. A coach can say, the rules are written this way. But if we go a little bit perpendicular, or a little bit at odds to the rules, we're not going to break any. So that's where I think a lot of genius gets thrown around in sports. I think that when you were talking about, I'm trying to think of an example with writers, but I can't. I think that when you talk about someone like Caravaggio broke a lot of norms. Caravaggio experimented a lot. He's often cited as being brilliant. I don't know that genius is a term that would be attributed to Caravaggio. A lot of the thing. See, he's an interesting case because he did a lot of innovation with certain aspects of his painting. But I think a lot of it, I don't know. I should have done a lot more thinking about this before I hit the record button. But I defy you to come up with an example of a genius that did not innovate in his or her field. When you think about someone, Neil deGrasse Tyson, often credited as being brilliant. I don't know anyone who credits him as being a genius. He does not innovate anything that I know of, but he certainly knows his stuff. He is a master craftsman a master craftsman with the subject that he has chosen to dedicate his life to. I don't know that anyone would call him a genius. I don't know that I have seen him innovate anything or heard of him innovating anything. Certainly very good with communication, communicating the ideas that are already at play in his craft, in his science. Very good at that. Genius, I think, is held for innovation. When we want to talk about genius and innovation, it has to be said that vision is one of those things that helps someone cross from brilliant to genius. The vision to see what might be. On page 47, we have a quote from the young and budding Leonardo. He says, "If the painter wishes to see beauties that would enrapture him, he is the master of their production." He wrote, "If he seeks valleys, if he wants to disclose great expanses of countryside from the summits of mountains, and if he subsequently wishes to see the horizon of the sea, he is Lord of all of them." This is why I think it is crucial to read biographies. the difference between brilliant and genius might be vision. Because vision leads to innovation. So how do we understand and partake in vision, which might increase, around the periphery of our lives, right? If you're watching this video, I hate to break it to you, there's probably no hope for you to end up being the next Leonardo. I know. We are not probably Leonardo. Probably because probably no one is. But if we are able to understand that what makes someone go from proficient to difference maker, from brilliant to genius, proficient to difference maker, is vision and creativity, then I think we are better able to look for those opportunities in our lives where the opportunity for vision, for creativity arise. And if we are in fact able to harness and capitalize on some small percentage of those opportunities, then we can make a difference in our own lives and the lives of those around us. And like, for example, Jordan Peterson has this quote where he talks about everyone being a node in a sort of like a labyrinth of connections, a labyrinth of social connections. Your main responsibility in life is there's all these nodes in your social network. If you can make your node rise just a little bit, these other nodes have to come with them. So I think that is interesting. I want to end this episode with a bit of history, I guess, historicity, I guess, culture of the day, I guess, that I did not know, with which I was unfamiliar. There is a painting, Ginevra da Vinci. Ginevra da Vinci, if you look at it right, that's her right there. And it is said that this painting from Leonardo was not, perhaps, commissioned by Ginevra's husband or her father. In an oddity of Renaissance culture and mores, the picture may not have been commissioned by the Vinci family, but instead by Bernardo Bimbo, who became Venice's ambassador to Florence at the beginning of 1475. He was 42 at the time. Ginevra here, I believe, is 16, or thought to have been 16 in the painting. Between 16 and 19. A little bit of the wording was confusing to me. He was 42 at the time and had both a wife and a mistress, those Italians. But he struck up a proudly public platonic relationship with Ginevra that made up in effusive adoration what it likely lacked in sexual consummation. This was a type of elevated romance that, at the time, was not only sanctioned, but celebrated in poems. Quote, "It is with these flames, and with such a love that Bimbo is on fire and burns, and Ginevra dwells in the midst of his heart," end quote. The Florentine Renaissance humanist Cristoforo Landino wrote in a verse extolling their love. It's a little bit difficult, I think, to empathize with this story in today's world. If there are any women watching this video, I would be extremely, excruciatingly interested to know how you would feel about your husband having not only a mistress, at least a mistress, but also a woman with whom he has a profound, public, platonic relationship. Some bitch that he just won't shut the fuck up about. That seems to be what is described in this paragraph. I had no idea that this moment in time existed, that these quote-unquote social mores, what does he call them here? Culture and mores, were allowed. It is an interesting thing to think about. But I think not entirely foreign to our world. And I'm not talking about sugar daddies, although probably this is one of those types of things. There is no shortage, I don't think, of older men who look out for younger women, assuming platonic is platonic, as the paragraph in this biography suggests. I think that probably everyone watching this has some example from their life. I think oftentimes it happens in a work environment that an older man sticks up for a young girl. In pop culture, we get it a lot in comic books, namely Wolverine and Jubilee, Wolverine and Kitty Pryde, Wolverine and there's someone else. I'm losing the name right now. But it makes me wonder if this dynamic is, if there's something there, if there is something innately human about that, that was at one time celebrated, but today sort of subdued and buried. But that is all I have for this, the 4th episode, as we learn about Leonardo. We will start chapter 3 next time in a chapter called On His Own. I hope to see you back then.